we may have little tactical differences about doing this or doing that, but I can't emphasize enough seeing the Germans be among the first to come out and say, yes, we should do the SWIFT removal. Yes, we're going to increase our spending beyond 2%. Yes, Netherlands and others, you can transfer German weapons. And by the way, we'll transfer some on our own. He has stirred up a hornet's nest, and we need to make sure that it stings him and stings him hard, because back in Russia, people have got to be asking, if the last 30 years of being better integrated into the international order, of being able to go to graduate schools at places like Stanford and Harvard, being able to buy Western goods for your kids, is Putin putting all of that at risk with now the isolation of Russia, so that it begins to look again like the Soviet Union that was completely isolated from the world? For Russians who don't even remember the Soviet Union, this has got to be a terribly bitter pill to swallow.
Harris Faulkner didn't get the interview she thought she was going to get, especially leading with that question about it being a war crime to invade a sovereign nation. She was talking to Condoleezza Rice, who was the 66th Secretary of State for the United States of America, also National Security Advisor. I think she was the first African-American and Black person to be Secretary of State and first to serve as a National Security Advisor, who I think presided over going into a sovereign land once or twice. But her response, as far as President Biden being strong and galvanizing NATO nations and being somebody that understands what's going on at this time, shocked. You could see the expression. Let me welcome into the conversation. He hasn't been here in a while because he's been on television, out there in the streets looking all good and everything. He looked good. He looks good today, but he's not TV good. But I'm all right with that because this is not radio. Let me welcome. What are you now? An analyst, a Democratic strategist, attorney at law. We call him DC STL. That's his handle, but I'm going to call him Don Calloway. Welcome to the Karen Hunter Show.
My dear sister, I'm so happy to be back. I missed you, Karen Hunter. I missed the Rebels.
No, have you, Don? Have you missed us? I legit
have. Most importantly, I missed the fact that I am your favorite music critic, and don't you ever forget it. I'm the guy. Oh my gosh,
please. Oh, Smith, get ready, because I also now found out during the break that you don't know anything about acting either. But we'll get into that in a second.
We'll get to that.
What is your view on where we are right now as a nation? And before we get into that, the strength of President Biden's reaction, what grade do you give him?
It's hard to grade him right now because it ain't even been a week, right? And I think that a president commanding 19, 20, 22-year-old American boys and girls, young men and young women into war is the most severe responsibility that a president has. So I'm not going to grade Joe Biden other than giving him an incomplete right now. I think his rhetoric on the global stage has been proper. Number one, suggesting that we're not going to go at it alone. We're going to go at it with the coalition. And number two, suggesting that unequivocally what Putin is doing is evil and it's unacceptable. And you're getting the opposite from Fox News and all those pundits over there who have some other agenda, but it's clearly not the right global agenda. I will say this, and the reason I love your show is because it's the most authentic opportunity I have to speak directly to Black America. And let's be honest about this, right? We ain't foreign affairs experts, and we certainly ain't experts in the history of the European bloc and national defense and all of this and that, right? But I think that the interesting thing about this, what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine, Black fam, is that you don't have to be those things to see wrong. We were taught that wrong is wrong. All you got to do is have a memory. Let's think back to the Trump administration. Who did he have in key positions? He had Michael Flynn as National Security Advisor. Michael Flynn was convicted for lying to Congress and lying to the FBI about talking to Russian head of state, essentially the Russian equivalent of the Secretary of State, about their plans to annex Crimea and potentially invade Ukraine. Who else did he have in his administration? He had, not in the administration, but in the campaign, handling Russian-Ukrainian affairs, was crazy-ass Rudy Giuliani, who was running around with two dudes, frickin' frack, Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas. We saw that happen. You can Google these names. They were running all around. They were detained in the United States. They were detained when they got back to Ukraine. There's a third actor, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was a lobbyist like me. And when you lobby for a foreign country, you have to make all of that extraordinarily transparent. It's called FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act. Paul Manafort was Donald Trump's campaign manager who was convicted and went to jail, only got out because of COVID, but he was convicted and he went to jail for lobbying on behalf of Ukraine in the United States without registering. So we got to think about putting the dots together here, y'all. Stop talking about
Put them together, Don Calloway. Put them together.
Stop talking about, the vice president is married to a white man, and stop talking about she's an AKA, and it's all right in front of our faces. Parnas and Fruman running around with Rudy Giuliani. Michael Flynn, national security advisor, convicted and pardoned by Trump for running around with Russians talking about Ukraine. Paul Manafort, convicted and did jail time for kicking it with Ukrainians, working on Ukrainians' behalf in front of the United States government and not telling the truth about it. So these were Trump's guys, right? These were his main dudes, and all of his main people were dudes. So I'm very intentional when using that gender exclusive language. These were his main guys. And so we don't have to know about the history of the Eastern European bloc. We don't have to know about the history of Nicholas Zelensky to understand that these are people that what Putin is doing now is the result of him having been empowered by Trump for the last 4 years. And Republicans are running around with this entirely crazy talking point. Well, he wouldn't have did this on Trump watch. He had an agreement that he wouldn't do it on Trump watch. So this was going to happen whether it was 2022 or whether it was 2025 after Trump got out. It was just a question of when, and with Trump losing, then he could go ahead and do it now. He wasn't ever going to do it on Trump watch because that would have been too obvious. But we do know that Trump and his main guys were kicking it with Russians and Ukrainians. And this has long since been agenda item number one on Putin's global agenda for world domination.
What about, we know that Donald Trump was impeached and Ukraine was involved because he was asking Zelensky to dig up information on Hunter Biden. So Hunter Biden has business in Ukraine as well. It's like everybody, Ukraine seems to be at the epicenter of a whole lot of stuff. Tell us, what do you know about that, Don?
We can't really say that Hunter Biden had business with Ukraine. Rudy Giuliani got with a Ukrainian prosecutor specifically to dig up dirt on Hunter Biden. We don't know what came from that. Maybe some lascivious details about Hunter Biden's drug use and personal life came out, but we can't say for sure that Hunter Biden had business dealings with Ukraine. That was
what was the Ukrainian connection to him anyway? What was that all about?
Hunter Biden was on the board of an energy company that had broad European-based dealings. Now, when you're in Hunter Biden world, for better or for worse, maybe it's fair, maybe it's not, you get invited to boards of global companies because you're connected. And we can have a whole nother discussion about imperialism and how that might don't be right, right? But Hunter Biden had no direct dealings with Ukraine that we know of, right? But even if he did, the national security advisor, your campaign manager, your top campaign advisor dealing directly with Russian intelligence and Russian military operatives talking about overtaking Ukraine, figuring out how that was going to happen over the next 4 to 8 years. That's where the smoke is. It's not with Hunter Biden. It's not with Solyndra or Fast and Furious or Uranium One or whatever else Sean Hannity has told us that the scandal is today. So there really is nothing there with Hunter Biden. The point about the Ukrainian prosecutor, and I forget his name right now, was that he was the guy who was willing to do Putin's work, digging into Hunter Biden's cybersecurity, digging into laptops, tapping and hacking, essentially, because you wouldn't want to work with an American to do this, because if an American hacker got caught, they would then be subject to the American justice system. So Rudy Giuliani worked with a Ukrainian prosecutor with all of the Russian abilities to tap into Hunter Biden's personal systems, and that's where they found out some details about his lascivious personal life.
That was Yuri Lutsenko.
Yes.
Don Calloway, can you stick around? Or do you have to go? Okay. All right. So, cause I want to know, where do we go from here? Right. We see the caravan heading into Kiev. I don't know if it's going to topple Ukraine today or tomorrow, but they have the firepower to do that. Right. Clearly they're targeting buildings that they said they would not, with civilians in them. So
Mm-hmm.
we've seen an apartment building now, an office building. There are a dozen plus people who have been murdered by this war so far, and some Russian soldiers. What should the move be for America? Are we doing the right thing in your opinion?
Well, listen, it's always the right thing to oppose Vladimir Putin and his dreams of global takeover. And it's important to think about why he would aim for Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the largest Soviet bloc countries over there, right? And most of Russia has a broad land mass, but much of Russia is barren land in terms of creating food and sustainable agriculture. Ukraine is one of the world's largest exporters and producers of barley, wheat, bread. So if I am going to create the new global empire to compete with China 100 years from now, because the American century is over, if you believe that, right? If I am going to be the next world superpower, I've got to have the ability to produce agricultural sustainable products. That's why I got to go to Ukraine, because now I control that barley and wheat supply. Other than that, Ukraine doesn't really matter much on the geopolitical spectrum, but they've got that natural resource of all that barley and wheat and agriculture that Russia does not have access to, because Russia is largely the frozen tundra, right?
Right.
And so I think that it's also important to connect this to recent history. We are doing the right thing by opposing it, but we cannot roll out tanks and bombs and fighter jets on our own, because we have a depleted military capacity from both actual capacity and secondly, the very important, people's desire to get behind unilateral war, because we just did that. If we're willing to think back to 2003, mission completed. We just withdrew from Afghanistan and Iraq. That is winding down. It's not completely over yet, but we don't have the power, and however broadly you want to define that term, to jump headlong into another extended actual war with a true superpower. So I think whatever we do, we've got to go into it with a global coalition.
Okay, this has all been very measured. Where have you been? I mean, it's like the noise on, just so much noise out there. This makes sense. Don Calloway makes sense. I love it. All right, when we come back, the president is giving his very first State of the Union. I feel like he's been president of the United States for 100 years. It's this first State of the Union. He's got the lowest approval ratings, but he was handed a heaping pile of crap from the previous Carnival Barker circus clown, and he's got low approval ratings. And I don't know what he can do about it, because I feel bad for him. I feel bad.
It's tough.
So give your prescription when we come back. Also, kind of lay out what you think is going to happen, and why do we even care about the State of the Union? Also, before we go to a break, the images of Black African students trying to get out of Ukraine and being pushed back from the trains is a lot to stomach for a lot of us. Yeah. How should we view that in light of the support most of us, I think, have for Ukraine's democracy and freedom?
Yeah. You want that now or after the break?
Well, we got a minute before we go to break. Can you do it in a minute?
I can do it in a minute. Let's talk about Black folks in Ukraine. I think that most people use the word ambivalent wrong. Most people use the word ambivalent when they really mean agnostic. Agnostic means you don't care. But Black people, we have the license to be ambivalent when it comes to what we're seeing holistically in Ukraine. Ambivalent. Ambi, that's two, valent, feelings. We can be of two feelings. We can say that it's dead ass wrong what they're doing to Black people and Africans over there in Ukraine, and still root for Putin to be defeated and not succeed in annexing and taking over this country by force. But yes, Ukraine, y'all are racist as hell, and that's wrong as hell what you're doing. But that doesn't mean that Putin is right, and it doesn't mean that we should not extend grace and mercy to the Ukrainian people who are also innocent. But racism never takes a day off. As the great Chris Rock said, that train is never late. And unfortunately, we're learning now that train is also global.
And he did it in under a minute and gave us a little Latin etymology. You better do that.